It is 6 p.m. on Monday, November 4th, so I will call to order first the local liquor control board meeting. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Deputy.
Justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Jenny, please join us. We have 2 items on the liquor control agenda.
Yes.
First is approval for Standing Stone Wines, first class, second class, third class liquor outside consumption permit tobacco license, and then an approval for a change to Hell Beer.
Yes, so thank you. No issues. How Beer needed to change their LLC, so it's just a clerical amendment. And no issues with Standing Stone.
Okay. Any questions from council? Would someone like to make a motion to approve the 2 items?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the end of the liquor control board agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Aurora, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries, meeting adjourned. Okay. It is 6:01, calling to order the Winooski City Council meeting. First up is agenda review. Unfortunately, due to an oversight, left off the 2 resolutions for this month, recognizing November as Native American Heritage Month and Veterans and Military Families Month. Can I add these to consent, Elaine, or do I need to add them to regular?
We're already kind of out of order, so we might as well add them.
Okay. I would like to add these into our consent agenda. Does anyone have any concerns with that?
No.
Okay, great. Thank you. Public comment. If you are not here for an item on tonight's agenda, now would be the time to make a public comment. If you are attending on Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature. I think everyone is here for something. Okay. So for consent agenda, we have our Cannabis Control Commission and City Council minutes from October 21st, payroll warrant, accounts payable warrant, interim appointments for the Inclusion and Belonging Commissioners, a resolution to establish parking enforcement holidays, a proclamation establishing November 30th as Small Business Saturday, a Justice Assistance Grant, finance and maintenance agreement for Hood's Crossing Signal, and the 2 resolutions I just added. Does anyone have any concerns about any of our consent agenda items?
I would just ask that the agenda be updated on the city website
Absolutely.
to add those 2 additional agenda items and the links to the language.
All right. Hearing no concerns, motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Bryn, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Council reports. Would you like to start, Thomas?
Sure, it can be quick. My commissions did not meet since we have last met, but Halloween did happen. So thank you so much to everybody who participated, whether you carved a pumpkin, gutted a pumpkin, carried a pumpkin, attended the festival. Thank you to some people in the audience here who definitely took part. It was just a fantastic annual tradition again, so really happy we were able to make it happen. And then a reminder that the Winooski Food Shelf is seeking volunteers. This is one of their busier months, particularly November 16th. So if you're able to sign up, that would be great. That's all I got.
Thank you. I will share that I joined our Chief of Police in attending the Governor's Chittenden County Capitol for a day Public Safety Roundtable held recently in Colchester. This meeting included some of the Governor's staff and then public safety professionals and select board chairs from Chittenden County, as well as the state's attorney. This was a useful venue for municipalities to share challenges we're facing in our communities, to inform work across admin, local, state, and legislative, and part of our effort to continue collaborating on that front as we address concerns in our community. That is the only update I have to share.
Sure. I don't have any updates, but a reminder that the Municipal Infrastructure will have a second joint meeting with the Finance Commission We will be joining the Finance Commission on their regular Tuesday meeting. It will be held here as well as online in the City Hall chambers on November 12th, starting at 6 p.m. We will be discussing budgetary items for fiscal year 2026 and don't have any other updates at this time.
Thank you.
Right, the only update I have is same as last time. So the Inclusion and Belonging Commission has a rescheduled meeting actually this week. So November 7th at 6 p.m. over Zoom with these 2 interim appointments. Hopefully we will be able to have a quorum and be able to continue discussions about best ways to do future outreach.
All right, thank you all. City updates, Elaine.
Unfortunately, I'm having connectivity issues, so they're being emailed to me at the moment.
All right, do you want us to wait?
Maybe just 1 minute.
Okay.
Maybe remind folks about voting.
Yes, you can register to vote up until at the polls. It is absolutely too late to mail your ballot in, but you are welcome to go to the senior center tomorrow to drop it off or vote in person. And maybe you can just keep going.
Sorry about that. Okay. We'll return to city updates. We will move to our regular items. And first up is on for approval, recognizing firefighter years of service and awards. Chief Audie. And welcome to our, looks like the full team.
Very close to the full team. I'm going to ask Chief Palmer and Spittle to come up. Please. So first, thanks for allowing us to take a few minutes. Deeply rooted in the fire service traditions is years of service recognition. And that's whether your career or combination or all volunteer. What's unique to Winooski, as career firefighters, you have a family and a career. Hopefully you manage family first and then your career. With the exception of a few of us here, most everyone here has family, full-time job, plus Winooski. And it's no small task to manage all that and the commitment levels that they have. Answering upwards of 600 calls now in Winooski, as part-time, the majority of the calls, we rely heavily on them after hours. So there's a tremendous value to Winooski. Before we ask them to come up, thank you for that commitment. It's super important. Seeing firsthand today, folks jumping in, dealing with the task at hand, extremely professional, compassionate, returning on one of the calls and making sure that things were tidy, things were in order. We didn't have to, they didn't have to, but they felt it was important for those returning there, including family and or patrons of the business to return. So again, just a huge level of professionalism and compassion that these folks do. What's represented here tonight is 180 years of fire service. 180 years of fire service. This is a pretty small group, but I was a little shocked by that number when I pulled it together today, as far as just adding up the years of service. So that's another pretty big task. So again, deeply rooted in the fire service, the tradition of getting years of service pins. So we're going to jump into that, and then we will also do the Responder of the Year, which is simply our data, who met the most, who responded to most of the calls. Moving forward, this program will be done annually. We'll do it with social media. Paul will work with us, our communications director. We'll work on social media as people hit their years of service pins and other achievements, including these folks being, voting one of their own peers in as Firefighter of the Year, another tradition of the fire service. So that will be for next year and represent 2024. What we're looking at tonight is current years of service, but the responder of the year will be for 2023. So I've asked Chief Palmer and Spittle to help me a little bit. I've just broke this out. 1 to 3 years is a certificate. Not with us tonight, I don't believe, is Firefighter Bernstein, but if Firefighter Desatel, Fire Inspector Mason, and Firefighter Santos could come up, please. A little bit more about this group. It represents 4 years. One who works in public safety, 2 who work in the trades, and 1 is part of our career staff. 3 to 5 year pins, if Firefighter Shagnon and Firefighter Johnson could step forward. Again, 7 years. 7 years. 1 is a small business owner, other works in IT and computer programming. 5 to 10 years. Lieutenant Chesborough, Firefighter Huang, Firefighter King, and Firefighter Tucker. 23 years of service in this group. 1 who works in public safety, 1 who's in higher ed, in the medical field, studying to hopefully be a doctor. Another who works in IT in the higher ed, and 1 who is studying law. So again, the workload that you're seeing and the diversity across the board of what these folks are balancing is huge. 10 to 15 years, this is a solo, Lieutenant Lind, again 13 years. Works in the trades. Not here tonight, Public Safety Admin Christine Gaudette, 18 years of service in kind of the rental registry fire department. Additional years that she worked downstairs in the PD, which we haven't accounted for, so kudos to her. 20 to 25 years. This is another solo, a huge rock for me as I've been here, and someone I have relied on. This department he has grounded this department through a lot of adversity. Has been a huge part of what we do. A lot of the staff looks up to him, and that's Battalion Chief Spittle. And that's 23 years of service. Just as important, another solo, 25 to 30 years, is Captain Bailey. His 28 years of service, again, has seen a lot and was part of our Winooski's start to community risk reduction, one of the beginning kind of founders, if you will, to the then rental registry program. Last but not least, what's that? 30 to 35 years. There's 2 of us. Fire Marshal Palmer, 30 years of service, and myself entering 34 years of service. That's it, right? Responder of the year. Again, I'm trying to not spend a bunch of time but the commitment levels that folks have is what keeps Winooski safe. And it's easy for us as career folks to be here during the day. It's our job, right? And so I'm balancing family and a career. Again, as I said, most of these folks behind us have a family, a career, plus Winooski. So when I look at what folks do for responses out of the year, 2023, January 1 to December 31st, was 582 calls. And there's 4 that stick out. And this isn't to say, not everyone sticks out, right? The load they pull is super important. But consistently, there's been 4 that rise to the top. Firefighter King, answering, 258 calls, accounting for upwards of 120 hours. Lieutenant Chesborough, answering 262, over 130 hours-ish. Lieutenant Lind, answering 269 calls, again in the 130 hours. This is just calls. This isn't their training. This isn't the public outreach. This is just emergency response. And the one who received the award this year is Firefighter Shagnon, who responded to 285 calls, about 145 to 150 hours in 1 year on emergency calls. So a tremendous load, recognizing all 4 of them, but certainly, Firefighter Shagnon rises to the top. Again, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Well, before you go, if I could just express gratitude on behalf of the council and community. As you've illustrated here tonight, the commitment that you all have to this community above and beyond a normal workload. The service that you provide is so critical. I know you all engage in hours of rigorous training in addition to actual call response, that you're often on call, dropping things at a moment's notice to come in and put yourself at personal risk to protect those, the rest of us in the city. So it's just, your work is so important, and we're so appreciative that you are all willing to step up and do it for us for all these years. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll stand. Let's get in there.
Yeah, well, count the coming.
You need 2 rows. Thank you, John.
Not the best chairs for hanging jackets.
It always runs away.
It does.
Should we revisit city updates, Elaine?
I should have them now, thank you. Yes. All right. So. You can be a little rowdy.
Yeah.
So budget season is almost here with our first official budget meeting in December. We do want to hear from you, that's staff and council. Please take a moment to complete our budget survey at winooskivt.gov/budget survey, all one word. Your input will improve the city's budget planning process and how your tax dollars are spent. The survey is scheduled to end on November 6th, so it's about to close soon. Budget information and the meeting schedule will be available on the city's website in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for more information. Please spend some time with Winooski Recreation and Parks during Volunteer Park Cleanup Day. Volunteers are needed for park and trail cleanup on November 9th at Memorial Park. Activities include plant trimming, litter pickup, debris removal, and other basic trail maintenance. To sign up, view our news updates at winooskivt.gov. And finally, help save a life by joining us for the blood drive at the Winooski Senior Center. That's at 123 Barlow Street on Friday, November 15th from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. You can view our news update at winooskivt.gov to sign up. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So moving on to item B, this is our biannual joint meeting with the Winooski School Board. So I will welcome Board President Robert Millar, Isaiah Donaldson up to the table. We have Kamal Dahal and Elam Kapeze. I might be saying that wrong? Alom. They are with us on Zoom, and then we have Superintendent Wilmer Chavaria here with us as well. We've historically hosted this biannual meeting to ensure collaboration amongst our bodies. And so I wanted to first start with inviting the school board to share an update on their current work and priorities. And then I will do so for City Council, and we will have time to ask each other any questions to learn more about what each other are focused on.
Okay. Making us go first.
Does Paul just start?
We do have a...
How do we ask? Yeah, sure.
Paul, go ahead. If you could share the presentation now from Wilmer.
Yeah. So if you want to go to the next slide. As we did last year, Wilmer really put together sort of an overview of sort of our work generally, and then focusing more broadly on less broadly, I should say. So if you want to go to the next slide. All these pictures are mostly Wilmer, and some are our communications director, who provide us with some amazing photos of the district. So first things first, as we've talked about in past years, we use policy governance framework, which is a little different than the council approach. So one of the starting points, it is what it sounds like. Our focus is on policy above all else, and we try to stay out of the nitty-gritty, the day-to-day, those sorts of things. In the place of where you have a vision and vision statement, we have an ends policy, which you've probably seen many times on our website, it's on every piece of paper that comes out of the school. And just for anyone who hasn't, it's all students will graduate from the Winooski School District, college and career ready, at a cost supported by a majority of the Winooski community. WSD students will lead healthy, productive, and successful lives and engage with their local and global community. Sounds great. What does it mean? That's something that we decided to really dig into at our board retreat over the summer. If you want to go to the next slide. And it's hard to read on there, but hopefully it's easier at home. We worked to really try to come up with some much more specific indicators of compliance, things that we could actually attach data to through the course of a year. And this took some work through the course of the day just to come up with these indicators. And then since then at meetings, we've worked to with the administration to identify specific data that could identify these. There's actually 7. There's 5 main ones, and then the little ones on the side that you really can't read, which are just as important, but they're pretty straightforward in terms of there's no, the data is what it is.
Is that the budget passes?
Right. Yeah. I probably don't need to go through each and every one, but do you want to read them? All right. I didn't really
So our indicators of compliance, number 1, diverse and rigorous course offerings ensure that all students, regardless of demographics, meet the necessary requirements to demonstrate academic readiness and their ability to take on post-graduation tasks. Number 2, students feel a sense of belonging and connectedness at school and their communities. Number 3, school programming is informed by up-to-date evidence and is based on choice, which in turn prepares students for the life they want to live now and into the future. Number 4, students and families are nurtured and supported and know how to access the resources available to them as they build lifelong habits of health and well-being. Number 5, the curricular design ensures options for students to connect with their learning to the local and global context and to engage in service and leadership. And then the 2 little guys on the side, number 6 and number 7, residents and taxpayers receive transparent and accurate information related to investment priorities, the school budget, and the budget performance, and that budgets are passed by margins at or above city levels.
Any questions so far? So as I said in meetings since the retreat, we've worked to really identify specific pieces of data available, and there is so much data at any particular time in a school district, things that we are required to collect. So, let's keep moving forward. Next slide, please. So this slide looks a little bit at some of the what is policy governance a little bit more specifically. Outward vision instead of internal preoccupation, encouragement of diversity and viewpoints, strategic leadership more than administrative detail, clear distinction of board and superintendent roles. I always think about a presentation we got last year or the year before. It showed a real hourglass. Up here at the top is the residents of Winooski, and then there's us, and then it comes to an exact point, and that point is this guy right here, and then it's an hourglass down. So, which, as looking at your presentation last year, you can see there's a little bit more wishy-washy around that edge, whereas ours is it's a point. And that's one of the big distinctions with policy governance.
What's at the bottom of the hourglass? So everything that, well, we have a slide that has more specific, but yeah, so it's the rest of the administration, the teachers, and then ultimately at the bottom, the students. And it ends with the students because that's our goal.
That's our product, essentially. Policy governance came out of a business environment, so yeah. So they are sometimes referred to.
Producing prepared students.
Yep.
Yeah.
Collective rather than individual decisions, so that's the same with your board, with your council. Future rather than present, what's on my mind. Proactively rather than reactive. So we try to have policies beforehand instead of trying to backfill policies to match what's already happened. Next slide, which I think is more on our board's role. So again, we represent the people up here at the top, which is referred to as the owners, because again, it's from that business context originally. So the owners, so our job is to represent them, maintain written governing policies, gain assurance of successful organizational performance. So that's, getting back to what I was just talking about, the end statement, and how do we define, or how do we determine that we are successfully doing that. Advocate for legislative change, exert high-level budget and financial oversight. So again, that's a place where we set high-level budget. We don't get into the day-to-day little, $5 thing here, there. Negotiating union contracts, conduct fair hearings in our role as a quasi-judicial body, which is not a fun thing to have to do. Hire and evaluate the superintendent, probably the number one thing that we do as a board. Propose a budget and ensure voter approval. I like that, ensure voter approval. Like, it is part of our job to make sure that the budget is passed. Any questions? So next slide, please. So now you can see the full bottom of that triangle. Well, no, it doesn't have students at the bottom, but it doesn't look like an hourglass on here, which is unfortunate. But you can see just how much Wilmer has to do at any particular time. There's a lot. Probably don't need to go into details on this unless you're really interested. We have some great principals and teachers. We've been getting a lot of accolades in recent years. We have Vermont's 2025 Teacher of the Year, Ms. Caitlin, for example. Sorry, I don't want to get lost on that. Let's keep moving forward. Next slide. This is important. This is an interesting thing that's come up recently. This is our VCAP scores, and I don't know what VCAP stands for. Well, I know Vermont's in there somewhere. Wilmer would know what this means, what that means. But it's kind of hard to see on here or even on my computer screen, but this is by grade level. And what you're seeing is, so the gray is 2023, the blue is 2024, and the green, in most cases, is the difference. So what you're seeing for most grade levels is improvement from 2023 to 2024 within district. Now, you know, these scores are lower than the Vermont average still, but still, you're seeing improvement year over year, and we don't talk enough about that. Like, this is a success story right here, so this is why we wanted to make sure to include this in our...
The improvement, it's important to note, it's at a greater rate than the state.
Yes, that's important. Anything else I'm forgetting that's important about this?
At a greater rate than the state, because the state remained mostly flat or decreased, while Winooski, for the most part, so increases in growth and academic performance.
Right. You probably saw some news articles about how the state's overall stayed flat.
And that's on an average.
Yes. And you can see that there is one particular grade level that wasn't doing as well, but that's important data too. That's something to identify and work on. So, any questions? Any other questions on this?
Do you have anything specific that you attribute this growth and improvement in?
That's a good question.
There's been many specific efforts over the past few years, especially post-pandemic. I was just giving an interview to the TV asking us that question. And some of these results, or the rate of growth that we're seeing, not only through this way of assessing, this is a state's version of our assessments. Our own internal assessments are showing a very promising story as well. But we decided to show this one because this one tends to be the one where the most red is seen over the years and where the most failure, so to speak, we've been accused of having at Winooski. So I'd like to begin showing the board how that narrative is beginning to shift, even through the measures that tend to be used against us. And as I was saying to the media, the efforts, these results coincide with very specific efforts over the past few years, investments that we've made with the additional money that we received for COVID relief, and then the ability, the new tax capacity that allowed us to continue with some of those efforts over the past year and this one, that would be this fiscal year. That includes hiring more multilingual liaisons, having coaches, finally adopting some very specific curricular materials. It includes alignment from pre-K all the way through 12th grade, hiring a flexible pathways coordinator. It includes creating time for teachers to collaborate with our new professional learning communities. The list goes on and on and on. And a lot of those investments are because we have the resources to make them. Of course, we wish we could do more, but I think what we have right now is very powerful, and our job now is to protect the ability to continue doing that.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it's so many different pieces. You can't. It's so hard to just pull out one thing because every student's pathway is different.
But it's exciting to see that it's pretty rapid sort of turnaround shift seeing like return on those investments.
And it's a really good point Wilmer made, that traditionally these are the types of things that are used against the district over and over again to just show how we're failing. And so when we're showing something really positive, we want to trumpet that.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because our Winooski district historically has been a highly targeted district on the state level from other surrounding districts. So it's pretty awesome that there's a lot of green on this chart.
Yes. Any final questions on that? Should I be asking the public to? Or?
Feel free to jump in.
Let's go to the next slide. So this is just a few highlights of our year on the board. Regularly monitoring district efficacy through the superintendent, who provides us, under policy governance, he provides us internal monitoring reports every meeting. Regularly assessing our own work through our own internal monitoring reports. And this is something that honestly fell off during the pandemic, and we've been starting to pick that back up this year. Regular internal monitoring of our own work. Developing knowledge, capacity, and culture within the board, regularly reviewing and adopting policy. We do policy every meeting. Every meeting is something. Engaging in proactive and comprehensive budgeting, engaging in proactive advocacy, activating the power of the end statement. You put that one in, Wilmer. I'll let it stand on its own. I think I just have one more slide. Next slide, please. All right, so I think you have budget on as our next agenda item, but just to
You
get
can,
ahead.
feel free to preview now.
Yeah, so this is the budget adoption timeline that we'll be working on, which is a bit compressed this year. I think the way the holidays landed and everything else is causing a lot of scheduling fun. But so we've got 2 meetings this month, our next regular meeting next Wednesday, and then a special meeting on the 20th. So at our next regular meeting, we'll continue having a budget context presentation, which we actually did have an initial context presentation at our last meeting, if folks want to look back at our next regular meeting sometime, which really looked at some very academic not academic, what does it actually look like at the state level, the funding formula, things like that. So if you've ever wondered what that looks like, it looks like it belongs in a calculus class at this point, especially with recent changes. So we did a lot of that just to have that out there if the public is looking for it. And we'll continue some of that context presentation at our next regular meeting. As being subject to the whims of the state, there's always lots of extra context beyond anything that we're doing here that we want to take into account. Not just the funding formula, but what does the legislative outlook look like, things of that nature. So we'll continue that. We should have our first budget versions by that special meeting on the 20th. We've asked for 3 scenarios as a starting point. A totally level funding, like actually the same amount of money, a level services budget, and a purely inflationary increase, which we were estimating at 2.4%, which feels really low after the past few years, but that's actually what is being projected now. So, so all of those are not involving big increases. This is something that we recognize, is that people saw big increases last year, even though the tax rate actually dropped something like 90 cents, but with the reappraisal and everything else goofy going on, people still got hit. So we're trying to keep that top of mind in this discussion. So this will continue the rest of the year. We'll have 3 meetings in December, which I'm looking forward to, where we'll work through different budget versions. We'll deal with whatever context pops up through the course of December. We have a potential special meeting on the January 2nd, because we could have, with the new year, we could have some surprises from the state. And then hopefully we'll adopt our budget as soon as January we have to actually, because of the rest of the schedule. So we have to adopt the
Yeah.
budget as a board on January 8th. So it feels really compressed when you look at it like this, but that's what we're looking at.
Well, thank you for sharing. I will say that seeing your measures, for how you're measuring the end state is really informative, helps me understand what you're looking for and what the end statement means. And the test performance data is useful too, as other leaders in the community, as you, I'm sure, hear about city issues. When people ask us about school context, this is useful information to be able to share or to point them to when we send them your way. Any questions from council?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Any public questions? Okay. There's no one on Zoom in the public, so.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I have a presentation as well that is unnecessarily long, so I'm going to try to rush through it, but stop me if you have a question. Paul, am I allowed to screen share?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great.
I like the way Paul comes in from.
Right. He's
I
always
want
watching.
He's the wizard.
the other person.
We actually have Krista in the room with us. Or
Paul is there.
it's
Yeah.
a combination.
If that isn't
You
possible.
might be able to show from the agenda.
I did print them out, just in case. Okay. So these slides come from our annual strategies and priorities retreat. And I'm just going to walk through them as context for where we are with our priorities and budget work. So we have the annual meeting to ensure we stay on track with our community vision and set the stage for prioritizing resources, budget, staff hours, community engagement, et cetera, in a manageable way with respect to the established community priorities in our master plan. Following 2 tough budget years with higher than average increases and community concerns about affordability and gentrification, and also internal concerns, it didn't change.
No.
Interesting. What am I doing wrong? Sorry, let me try again to share.
Whoa.
Oh.
You really were.
Black hole.
Well, that's
That's
the
a first
original
for
Star
me.
Wars movie.
I was thinking Star Wars.
Yeah. You jump
the
to
neon
hyperspace.
Let me try this
Cool
again.
video.
It would be annoying, but you could always have Paul.
Yeah.
Sure.
Paul, do you want, well, what if I
I
just,
sure can if you need me.
okay, yeah, you can share the one that's in the packet. Thanks. If you can put us on slide 2, please.
I'm sharing. Hang on just a second. Do this.
Okay. So as I was saying, a lot of concern about affordability, gentrification. So we wanted to sort of look at data as well and level set, where we are and what does that mean for our path forward. Next slide, please. So the key questions that we were thinking about is municipal property tax. How is that contributing to unaffordability? Is it to a problematic extent? And then do we need to change our plans for debt? And debt came up because that's been a big area of expense. We've done some significant investments, voter supported recently. Next slide, please. So when we looked at this question, we asked ourselves, affordable to whom? What is outside our control? We also had this question about, are people moving up and not just getting priced out of the city? Couldn't find a data point to measure for that, so it's something to keep in the back of your mind. Next slide, please. So when we think about affordable to whom, we wanted to look at demographics in the community. Next slide. So we looked at racial diversity in Winooski and found that it's increasing over time. Next slide. We also compared to some similar communities, so our neighbors, Burlington, South Burlington, and then Berry City, which has some similar like size and expense and revenue and things of that nature. And we found that our racial diversity is also increasing at a larger rate than our comparable towns in Vermont. Next slide, please. We wanted to look at age. We have seen this slide from the school district about declining enrollment projections, and that's an area of concern. Next slide. And we have in fact seen that some stability in the 65 up and growth in the middle, you know, probably because of the shrinkage in the under 18 area. We did note that that's a trend statewide, but we don't have the data to actually see how much we diverge from that. And it's still a concerning area either way. Next slide. So then we wanted to look at income. Median income is on the increase in Winooski. Next slide. But it's a similar trend to other communities in Vermont. We don't have data to determine how much of this is related to wage growth, knowing that minimum wage has increased and there has been some wage growth, or if some of it is related to higher wage earners moving in, displacing lower income residents. Next slide. So we also looked at the distribution of housing in Winooski. We know that we have seen a shift in a larger share of rentals than owner-occupied units in the city. But what we found is that from 2000 to 2020, Winooski actually added 980 rental units and 32 owner-occupied units, a 33% increase. So while the balance has shifted, we haven't actually lost home ownership. We're just not growing it as much as we are adding rental units. I would also note that this growth is pretty attributable to form-based code and gateway development. And that we've been able to increase housing units, not at the expense of green space, which we have retained.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
The owner-occupied data versus renter-occupied, does the owner-occupied include, say, someone owns multifamily, but they physically live in that space?
Their unit would count towards the owner, and those other units would count towards the rental.
So you're doing it by unit? Okay.
By unit.
I had just read unit as property, but
Oh,
thank you
yeah.
for clarifying.
Housing unit.
Thank you.
Next slide. So we were also considering other factors on affordability that are mostly outside our control. We do have some influence on housing. Obviously, we don't have full control there. One thing to note that's missing from here is childcare, which came up in the meeting. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing housing cost data. It's a little bit confusing. The blue bar is the price range for each of the unit types. And then you can see the average price for affordable units in green. Hold up. Yeah, affordable in green, new construction in orange, and old construction, meaning like old existing homes, in yellow. And I think the trend that you can see here is that housing costs are increasing. Like, new construction is more expensive. Construction costs are increasing, sale prices are higher, interest rates have increased. So the new housing is more expensive than the older housing. But and on the whole, the average is going up. Next slide, please. This slide is showing vacancy rate data. Unfortunately, we cannot get particularly recent data for Winooski at the local level. But I mean, what we know and what it is reaffirming is that the vacancy rate has been declining. 5% is industry standard for a healthy rate, and we continue to be under that. Next slide. So this slide is showing tax bill data and compares to the rate of inflation over time. So while the overall tax bill has increased more than inflation, we found that the city portion of the bill has not. It's been generally under the rate of inflation, meaning residents are effectively paying less now for city services than they did in 2014, which was also something to, it was a surprising data point when we were reviewing things. Next slide, please. This slide is showing tax rates for comparable towns. It's adjusted for the CLA common level of appraisal, which you folks would be aware of. For anyone who's watching this later, what is a good way to describe this? It's how the state normalizes across towns what the tax rate is. Okay, you're affirming that, thank you.
Well, it normalizes property values.
Property values, that's a better way to say it, thank you. So we often hear that we have a very high tax rate in Winooski. Obviously that's changed post-appraisal, but while the rate number has been high, the actual dollars per person in Winooski is in the mid-range. So that's what that third chart is showing us.
Is this the newest?
No, but the newest
This is
one
pre-appraisal.
has similar, we're ranked similarly.
Actually better. We are below the average.
Yeah, we're below the average now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We didn't do an average for the region, we just did a selection. So, yeah, if it looks better, share that with us.
It's
We'll
better
share
than
that
those
with staff.
towns that we're comparing,
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, except for a couple, except for Colchester, which is always very low.
Yeah, these slides are all from a June meeting and the data's probably May. Next slide. So we came back to this question after looking at all of that data. Our consensus answer to this question was no. You know, while we need to be mindful of affordability, our municipal tax rate is not the major contributing factor. Moving on to question 2. So this is where we wanted to look at our plans for debt. Next slide, please. So this is the history of municipal debt in Winooski. You can see that before the downtown revitalization in the early 2000s, the city had very little debt. While it has spiked up to about 23 million with recent projects and bond votes, it's still well below that peak of 32 million when the downtown debt was taken out. Next slide. So this is the history of bond votes from 2018 to 2024. Voters approved 7 bond votes authorizing over $43 million of debt to fund, including the water treatment plant's Headworks project, the Main Street revitalization project, the new swimming pool, the new garage that's under construction downtown, reconstruction of Hickok Street, a new fire truck, and funding for the upcoming bridge reconstruction. I think this is where we were having all of these things happen at once, making us nervous about our debt plans. Next slide, please. So our current policy is that we are allowed to carry up to 15% of general fund expense as debt and 20% of utility revenue. We're well below those. That is not true in the number you see in parking, but that's because of the financing related to the garage. It will be true once that loan is worked out. If I said that poorly, Elaine, please correct me.
Right, once we start seeing proceeds, we expect it to work out.
Yes.
That makes more sense.
Thank you. Next slide, please. We also looked at our local options tax revenue because when voters approved local options tax, it was under the understanding that that would be a new revenue source to fund capital projects and infrastructure beyond just property tax. State statute allows the city to collect 1% and retain 70% of that revenue. 30% goes to the state. So we have averaged about $500,000 annually for meals, rooms, alcohol, and sales tax. And I believe project to continue doing so.
Yes, we just got the report today for this quarter, so we look like we're gonna hit our projections for this year.
Excellent. Next slide. Okay, here's another one where staff can jump in if I bungle it. This is intended to show depreciation, which is defined as a reduction in the value of an asset with the passage of time due to wear and tear. It's best practice to spend at the level of depreciation or lost value to maintain a steady state. So spend enough to maintain your aging infrastructure. What you see in these spikes is that past budgets haven't done this, requiring debt to cover capital projects to maintain infrastructure. We have recently reached a steady state to cover debt service and slowly increase annual spending on maintenance, but we're still not budgeting enough. Like, we still have catch up to get to that best practice level where we would be funding against depreciation, maintaining things without needing to go into debt. What's that? Well done. Thank you. Next slide. So we wanted to look ahead at what debt is coming off and what is coming on. Next slide. So existing debt will drop significantly in 2028, providing some capacity for new capital projects and debt. Staff don't anticipate any new large bond votes in the next 10 to 20 years. And when I say large, I'm talking like a $23 million Main Street project. We do anticipate smaller, like street reconstruction bonds. So for example, like Hickok Street, $3 million. So things like that rolling in. And then there's our ongoing, when we replace like a street sweeper or things like that are like a couple $100,000, those are always carried in the capital plan through debt.
Also, don't get too excited. This doesn't show debt that we are anticipating but don't actually have in hand yet. So for Main Street and the garage. It's not going to be that low.
Thank you. Next slide. So this is an example of waterline projects that we need to tackle, which would be those street reconstruction bonds. The 3 short-term likely candidates are highlighted. And when I say short-term, they're not happening next year. It'd be like a roughly 5-year timeline.
Well, also the idea is that these are water projects that would also be resurfaced. So we're not digging into a fresh road to resolve the water issue.
That's right. Yeah, and that's part of the prioritization process. You've got a street in bad shape and water line that needs replaced. That street's getting fixed before another.
I personally like your priority.
You must live on
It
one.
stops just before your house.
Yeah.
And then begins
before the
right
bridge.
again right after.
Next slide. This is in our wastewater fund. We don't have any major water treatment plant projects. You don't see dollar values on here. These things do have costs, but weren't highlighted as being significant to the point of debt projects. Next slide. This is a list of projects from our transportation master plan. So that was a community-driven plan for prioritizing transportation improvements. These projects seek to improve multimodal transit by creating new infrastructure, so they are above and beyond just maintenance. But again, like what Elaine was alluding to, they would be most likely wrapped into, if we have to go in and do the water line work, that's the opportunity to do any changes to the surface. Next slide. We also have a pretty robust parks and open space plan. This slide shows the short-term recommendations in that park plan. And the next slide, please, Paul, shows all the long-term ones. So again, this is additional stuff that is part of our community vision, but will require funding eventually.
Maybe some glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea here wasn't to list them all and have people digest them. It was mostly to see the amount of, in the right-hand columns, green versus gray versus beige. Green means it's finished, beige means it's ongoing or somewhat underway, and gray is not started. So there's a lot of gray, is the point.
Yeah. Next slide. So we then reflected on this question, and again, we came to the consensus that the answer was no. Given the open capacity coming and the fact that we're still not funding at a level to keep up with depreciation and maintenance, and that we don't have more huge projects in the queue, we decided we can stay the course for now with our debt plans. And so essentially, between these two questions, I left this part out at the beginning. We have the master plan, the community vision that guides our work. And so if we had answered either of these questions no, then we would have needed to revisit that and discuss how to work through it in a narrower way. Like, we obviously can't do everything in there. And so what we left the meeting with was, we can proceed with attacking the goals in the master plan and working towards the community vision. It is an aspirational document, and it is not something, while we update it every 8 years, it's not something we complete in 8 years. So, those were my notes for the next slide, but Paul, can you skip the next one and go to the end? So, coming out of that, we needed to take the step of actually adopting our priorities for 24-25. And so leaving that, we reaffirmed most of the ongoing priorities from last year, because much of this work is ongoing. We added only 3 new items, including exploring how to support businesses through Main Street construction, completing an equitable housing needs assessment. Excuse me. This would update a database housing needs assessment we had in 2017, and include a community engagement piece, so we better understand the landscape of our current housing needs, both from what is on the ground and what folks feel we need in our community. And then the third edition was exploring ways to support residents generating more frequent service calls. This is related to not just public safety, but like across all of our staff that are engaging with the public. There's an increase in service demand and folks who need just a lot of support that's impacting staff capacity and ability to deliver our base operations. So this is probably also difficult to read with the tiny font. But I would pause to hear if there's any questions from anything in the presentation or about anything you see on the priorities list, which I can share out with your board after too, just so you all have reference of what we're focused on.
It may just help to say that this strategies and priorities list is actually pared down from what we've done in previous years.
Mm-hmm.
And you may, I'm not sure if you said this, but it's in the far left column, you can see that it's laid out into categories and that map directly to our master plan.
And what is the color coding on here?
It's just to distinguish between the categories, that's all.
Well, in the darker shade, the
that's
blue
true.
means
what
reflects
I was saying,
must-dos. Lighter shades mean recommended. So darker shade blue, darker shade green, those are the must-do items. The lighter shading just means it's a recommendation.
And why is there green and blue?
The green and blue is just so,
To help
know-
distinguish between the categories.
yeah,
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't notice that.
Like
Thank
blue
you.
is- yeah.
That's what you meant when you said that. My apologies.
between the two.
No worries.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll mention too, you can view this document at winooskibt.gov/council.
Thank you, Paul. Also, I would add, this is like the strategies that council has adopted as priorities to meet the master plan. This is well above and beyond base city operations and not at all reflective of all of the work that the city is doing.
Yeah. I feel like one additional piece of context that, if it would be okay if I add with the first question, is the municipal property tax contributing to unaffordability to a problematic extent? That I think one of the things that we saw too, and I feel like this is also a little bit when the school budget, or at least the school taxes and how the state deals with that I think both the city and, I won't speak for the school, but that there are things that are at the state and federal level that are contributing more to the unaffordability, and that we need folks both in our community to advocate for folks at the state level and for folks at the state level to advocate for us to, ensure that, like, Winooski is a special town. We have these special needs. The school is seeing those improvements. We have the things like our bridge project. That's one of our upcoming big things that has some state funding. Just thinking about the ways that we're doing our best. A lot of our services that we are paying for with our taxes serve our most vulnerable residents. If we lowered those taxes, we wouldn't be able to provide those services for our most vulnerable residents. So additional support at state and federal levels was definitely needed.
We'll be talking about that shortly.
Exactly. Stay tuned.
I should also remind Kamal and Alom who are on Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature if you want to flag my attention to interject. So this also tees us up for our budget, informs sort of what we're going to be looking for there. And we just had our meeting to give guidance to the city manager on what we would like to see. I first want to just thank our community for investing in the school and the city. We clearly recognize the financial pressures that are happening right now, and that they also exist on, as you well know, on the delivery of services from each of our organizations. I think healthcare is coming in at 20-some% increase. Inflation is around 3% right now. And most of our staff are on union agreements, so that's tied to inflation, they're going to get raises. And then we also have a policy where our non-union folks follow step and grade as well. So even just to keep level services will require a tax rate increase. So we asked the city manager to present us with a budget that has modest investment in infrastructure and fire safety. And I also expect to see other items come out. Public safety is a big area of concern, and there may be some other new funding requests from partners that we work with. So that is what we are approaching for a city budget that we'll be considering. We start our meetings the first 2 Mondays in December, and then all 4 Mondays in January. We go through our budget process. I think the 20-something is the voting date.
Oh, when you,
24th? No. 27th.
the regular voting day.
No.
no, wait, that's right.
No, I saw you
We
planned.
have to do a
Yeah.
approved budget.
Yeah,
You hope to approve yours on the 8th. Ours is about 2 weeks later.
You're adopting.
We go to the final date of possibility before we can get it on the warning there.
Right, so you do final budget and warning on January 27th.
Oh, yes, very late. Thank you. Well, this might be a good time to transition us into item 3, which is community engagement. So we have a couple of things going on. We've been tabling at the farmers market. We're coordinating some visits to Winooski Housing Authority properties. Some of those are senior buildings, 2 of them are family housing. We'd be happy to invite you, keep you posted on those. I've also reached out to some contacts in the Somali community. I haven't reached out with the Congolese group. I think last engagement was school-led, so I hadn't done that yet. And then our wonderful finance director has been doing community activity where folks get to look at a box for each city department and distribute money. So we're also using that this year to get some more community input on the budget. Our out in public outreach will be budget centered for now, but we also will bring other topics from the strategies and priorities. And then we also have a community survey going. Curious what you all are doing and if there are any opportunities for collaboration.
Oh, okay. That's a very pointed look. Yeah, it's a bit more compressed of a schedule than it has been in previous years. So that's something that we're working around. But I think one of the number one things that we do on a yearly basis is try to get our budget buddies involved, where we each try to get folks from various different communities out in the larger community to join us for the whole budget discussion. So working on that. We'll also be looking at other potential possibilities, possibly doing our own survey, or we did a community event last year that went pretty well, and I think was a good learning opportunity. So we might try to do something else like that, but it's an evolving thing. We'd be happy to be invited to any activities that you're putting on or participating in as well. I think it's always good when we can coordinate, because folks don't necessarily see that we are separate entities, and it's good to not have people feel like they're being double hit over and over. So yeah, working together is always good.
Robert, I share out the Winooski Food Shelf sign-up calendar with council. I'm happy to add you to that when that gets shared out, or if there's somebody else that I should share it with on your board, I can do that too.
You can also share it with the whole board.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Just in reference to the Budget Buddy program, whatever you want to call it, each board member for the school board, we make a commitment to getting at least one, right? Obviously, we can have as many as we want.
Okay.
But each board member has to, they're quote unquote required to get their own budget buddy, and it's someone from the community. Whether it's a friend or just someone from a different aspect of all those things, but we all commit to that, and those budget buddies sit with us throughout the entire budget process. They're sitting in meetings, whether it's through Zoom or in person, but then also it's our role as members of the board outside of the meetings to be communicating with them on a regular basis, giving them updates and making sure that they understand those things, and then those budget buddies then speak to their community, right, and get feedback from other neighbors and all those things, and make sure that's a pretty involved experience, and it's pretty great. And then with the outreach event that we did last year, I hope we do another one this year. I think it was really great. Myself and Nicole Mace were the main board members involved with that last year, but we invited all community members to the school, but provided food and childcare, so they would be able to come, and also provided transportation for some folks that needed it. And then we also had available a slew of translators, so we could be doing it in action and everyone understands what we're saying in the moment, not waiting for it to be translated. So everyone had the headphone translators in real life, which was really, really great. And during that, we did the survey, and that was a lot of learning curve that we had from that. But this year, we're definitely going to do another survey. We just kind of implement it a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other piece of the budget buddy thing that I think is important is that the more people you have involved in the process who then get invested in what they helped create, and then hopefully go out into the greater community and be advocates.
I'll certainly point people your way if I run into
Please,
potential community members.
They also quite frequently end up being board members later on. I was a budget buddy way back. Alone was a
Any
budget
loan
buddy.
was on Zoom.
Yeah. All right. Should we move on to the final item, which is legislative priorities? So I know you all have sort of a conversation with our reps and senators where you share your priorities. we have, for the last couple of years, put together a formal letter to send to these folks. At least one active is in the room, and I have it on the agenda. Do you guys all have a link to that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So it's actually the next formal item in the council meeting agenda, but I wanted to include space for that with the WSD board. So if there's any like feedback or input you want to offer, I mean, I would invite your board to make any suggestions you would like. And if all of this sounds like stuff you care about too, we could even have like a joint sign on to it, but no pressure on that.
Yeah, what I thought would be a good idea as I was looking at that is, open up right now if folks have feedback right now, but also have our board come back to this at our next regular meeting next week, when we'll also talk about what else we want to do. You know, in the past we've invited legislators to come join us for a meeting in December with just a list of priorities, and I thought that was pretty successful too. But whether we'd want to sign on a letter or anything like that would be a board discussion at that point. But yeah, it'd be great if we could, if there's any feedback right now.
Yeah.
We're also short a member tonight, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. There was one thing that I had on the education piece. I think this one thing that I thought as I was looking, you said something about upholding the state's commitment to providing equitable access to education. I think it's important to remind people all the time that we have a constitutional duty. That's what several Vermont Supreme Court cases have said. So just reminding our legislators that it's their constitutional duty to provide an equitable education to all Vermont students. I think this is a perfect time to do that. That was just one thing that had popped into my head.
You know, I almost baked that in there, and then it turned into a lengthy statement about the Brigham decision, and I pulled it back out. But I could add that constitutional duty for sure. I will say these two items under education are fairly similar to last year's, which your body had weighed in on.
Yeah. Yeah,
If-
I didn't have any issues.
But if there were new educational priorities you wanted us to get on board with, you could also share those after next week's meeting.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what is your, what's the goal, drop dead date?
I was going to ask
Yeah,
council
sign
to
on.
approve it tonight, but if they have edits, we can't anyway. So
So there you go.
December, the first meeting in December, that's our next opportunity. Yeah. It's like for first Monday, December.
Cool.
Maybe I'll pause on approval this evening either way.
Yeah. Yeah, the second.
So December 2nd.
Yeah, thank you. Someone who has a calculator open. Any other questions from school board members on any content in this letter?
I mean, from my end, just, I really appreciate that number one is related to affordable housing. It just really makes it a high impact. And I also appreciate that education is the last, because it's the sandwich between the two. And I think, everything on this is completely important, but those are definitely big outliers in importance of me personally.
Yeah.
And of our board, because affordable housing is a big focus for us as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've heard.
Good.
Okay, our next official item is going to be this document, but to close out this joint meeting, are there any final comments, questions while we have our school board folks here?
Oh, thank you. Just seems like we're aligned as we head into our budget session, so not that we have to be, but it's nice.
Well, I appreciate you all coming and sharing your updates with us and engaging in discussion. And you're welcome to stay for the rest, any additional parts of the meeting, or go home as you see fit.
I appreciate you having us here.
I would recommend it, Wilmer.
Yeah.
It's good to be in your space, because last year you guys came to our space. So.
We like to rotate.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
I need to adjourn. Could I have a motion to adjourn for my members? You can,
So moved.
all those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay. Your meeting's adjourned.
Oh, it's more official now.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay, now we're on item C, the Winooski City Council legislative priorities, which for the sake of folks in the room, do you have it open? Should I put it on Zoom? Sorry. Oh, I was asking if you had a link to the agenda or if you want me to share it on screen. No, I'm looking at the legislative priorities. Okay. I do want to call out for counselors, under number 3, you will see a new item B, which wasn't in the version I circulated because this was something that just came up during that, the meeting the governor hosted last week. It was an item, one of his staff mentioned that all of the chiefs in the room, including our own, were very alarmed about. So I chose to put it in here at the last minute. So as I shared with each of you via email, some legislative leadership had suggested we keep a pretty tight list this year. So this aims to be a bit shorter and more focused than what we've provided in past years, with focuses on access to appropriate and affordable housing, addressing public safety, social services support, and retaining the commitment to equitable education access as the education fund is worked on, as it's sure to be this year.
Yeah.
But I would welcome any further questions for consideration or suggested edits.
I know that we've looked at this a decent amount and understanding that this isn't absolutely everything that we care about advocating for, and also understanding that throughout the session we can reach out to the folks who represent us in Montpelier, but that these were some of the top issues that we really wanted to highlight, especially with the guidance that you received from leadership in the dome, under the dome, I should say. I think for many similar things to the list that we provided last year, and dwindle down a little bit to make it more concise. But I think that it hits the main issues of the things that I hear about from a lot of folks. Of course, there is more that could be on here, but we want to be effective.
I have one tiny language suggestion, which is to actually the title of 4 is just wondering if we could include, so it says currently, the reduce the impact of climate change to preserve thriving communities for all Vermonters. I'm wondering if we could change it to reduce the impact of climate change to preserve thriving communities and achieve climate justice for all Vermonters. And specifically calling out climate justice for thinking about the racial equity aspects, and also thinking about the resolution for F-35s, where he called out both the environmental racism and classism that the jets represent.
I think that's a good edit.
Yeah.
No one else has concerns?
I don't have concerns about the language. Also staying within section 4, one thing that's absent is any conversation about the Affordable Heat Act or the Clean Heat Standard. Majority of our community are comprised of Vermont gas customers, and so transitions off of Vermont gas should come with intentions to provide incentives and financial support for transitions, especially given the financial makeup of our community, and the hardships that would bring with such a mandate without financial support to adhere to that transition.
Can you tell me more? I'm not super familiar with this piece of legislation. I'm
I'm
aware
not
there's
a-
a discussion, but
And I'm not an expert on it either, so I think it would probably be wise to speak to our elected officials currently. Essentially, in summary, it is an effort to meet the goals of the Global Warming Solutions Act, and which are ambitious, and which the legislature enabled private citizens to sue the state for not meeting the goals within the designated timelines. One such objective to meet those goals was to adopt the Clean Heat Standard, and that has gone through significant public discussion and additional scrutiny over the cost of implementing it as it stands. But in summary, it is essentially creating a timeline, an expedited timeline to move Vermonters off fossil fuels and to electrify their homes and businesses.
do you want to add anything? Please come up. Please join us for public comment.
It's kind of hard to with the kids.
Okay.
There is a commission working right now on a report that we'll see in December, January. That'll have more information about the costs that a lot of folks have heard various numbers around that have many of us worried, as well as implementation timeline. And we would have to vote again on that, the legislature will, before any implementation would happen.
So namely, given the bullet point here, reduce the impact of climate change, just want you to articulate the support for doing as much as we can to mitigate contributions to climate change and recognizing the unique makeup of our community so that financial support is provided to help with that transition would be my only request for addition of language.
Do others want to add a bullet for that?
I definitely agree with you, Councillor Oakleaf. I'm just wondering if that bullet falls in 4 because it kind of is contrary to reducing climate change if we're advocating for.
For financial support for the transition?
Sorry. Yeah, sure, put it in there.
Essentially, it is agreeing that climate change is a priority and
Yeah.
advocating for incentives so that it's not an unfunded mandate.
Right. Okay. With the, I just, with the cost of what it's gonna be, I just don't want it to, if there isn't able to be some sort of complete assistance, to say that we're not interested in looking more into moving away from fossil fuels. But I think it's fine.
I'm trying to think of what the exact wording could
Yeah.
be, and if there's a way that we could maybe call out that funding for that specifically, but also call out, I'm just trying to think if there's a way we could talk about this issue more generally. Like if stuff like that is going to be coming out of the legislature, to make sure that there's the financial support. And that to me is where, again, thinking about the environmental justice piece of this too.
Yep.
So I think I would be in support of it if we could figure out the wording. At the moment, I'm still a little
We can
unclear.
essentially say a just transition.
implement recommendations of the commission's report on the clean heat standard and transitioning off fossil fuels without creating unfunded mandates that don't, something
That prohibit a
That-
just transition.
ensuring
To a
there's
clean energy
financial
future.
support for.
I
Did
think
you-
the emphasis is just on, they need to be there needs to be,
There needs to be financial
Awareness of-
assistance for folks to
yeah.
be able to do it.
exactly.
Yeah, we don't want to have our residents being penalized or
Right.
left behind.
We definitely support it, but we
Yeah.
want to make sure that people in Winooski can actually afford
Yep.
that change.
Yeah, we want to avoid any perpetuation of environmental
Inequality.
racism
Yeah,
and
exactly.
inequality.
Yep.
And do we want to add this or remove a bullet from under there?
Mhm.
Replace anything?
I would just add it,
We're already on 2 pages.
and that way it
Oh,
makes
three
the third
pages.
page feel a little
Yeah.
less annoyingly short.
It wasn't
Yeah.
3 pages when I submitted it, which means I formatted something wrong for Paul.
Font, change that font from 12 to 10.
Yeah. Sorry.
If it, can it perfectly nudge 5 down to be on its
There
own
you
special
go.
page.
Yeah.
There we go.
Stars and hearts around it.
Might want to put page numbers 1 of 3.
You know,
I'm getting it back onto 2.
Christine's gonna do it. I'll leave it there.
Anything else from council? Oh, yes, and Robert's still here. Anything else from you?
I was just noticing, I think 2 different thoughts have kind of run together on 1B.
Robert, I'm sorry. They're gonna have.
Oh, yeah, can you come up to the, I know Daisy declined, but.
It's just a typo.
Oh.
Council wants to know what the typo is, Robert.
On 1B, it seems like maybe 2 thoughts ended up running together. It says protecting existing housing by passing municipal charter changes that include just cause eviction protections, and then it's by creating a statewide protection. So we've gone from asking them to pass the charter changes to asking them to pass a statewide law. So
The goal is to get them to do both.
Yeah.
I understood. It ended up on the same sentence.
It's like a period in there.
I'm not going to tell you how.
Yeah.
That's a Robert's
I'm
job.
just here to point out the problem.
Should it be and create a statewide standard?
Yeah.
Statewide
Yeah.
protection?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Any other public comment?
One thing that is not mentioned in the just cause eviction, and I believe there are only a small handful of municipalities that have ordinance language relating to the amount, like to put a cap or a threshold on a deposit amount. And I think it seems to be common that it's limited to no more than the amount of one month of rent. And that could also be beneficial at a statewide level.
I'd love to see that, yeah, because places will do like deposit first, last, and
Right.
that's
A lot of money.
it's a lot of money to try and drop.
Yeah.
While I agree, in the
This is
spirit of
looking at
keeping a
Jasmine.
focus list,
Fair,
I didn't want to put too many requests in.
Go ahead.
You know, I normally like to get things done quickly, but I do wonder if we want to have a separate discussion on that.
Well, yeah, what I
Before we
was going
put
to
it in
ask
here.
was a clarifying question along those lines was, if the city were to pursue some ordinance language, would that regarding thresholds for deposit, would that require a charter change, or would that just be an ordinance change?
Jasmine, do you know? I know deposit stuff has come up in Housing Commission before.
I don't know for charter change or ordinance change.
Yeah.
But I mean, I agree that that's definitely it. I mean, I could bring a little bit more like firm research on it to the next council meeting.
That's what I'm wondering.
So could we do it, at least to do it at our levels, that, and then maybe,
At least have an idea of like what the public process would have to be. Like if it would need to be a charter change, that's a very different public process than
Just an ordinance.
an ordinance change.
so maybe not something for this yet, but think about, like, if it ends up being a charter change for next time.
If it needs to go that route.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that this language, we're asking passing municipal charter changes that include, doesn't exclude any other charter changes that we may do related to housing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Daisy?
So, I'm always looking at this through the lens of, it's gonna be hard to advocate at the state level for anything that isn't in this letter, right? Because I'm supporting the city, the municipality, and the residents, which this letter should reflect. And so I'm looking at it even closer through the lens of someone that is on the healthcare committee and really drives mental health and behavioral health in general in the legislature. And just really appreciate you embedding that, you know, throughout the letter, especially in, I think it's 1B, maybe it's under 2. Yeah, 2A. But I feel like I saw health called out more last year, and I just wonder, did you consider, you know, mental health and behavioral health in general being more of a proactive or preventative conversation rather than something that's reactive for folks who are in recovery or are unhoused? Did you have any conversations about that?
Frankly, no, because I haven't seen any legislation around it. Everything that's pulled into here is from it's all connected to specific discussions that council has had. And while there's a vein of like mental and health services woven throughout things, I don't think we've like had any specific policy discussions or concerns raised to us that are like very clearly about that proactive approach. And to be honest, it's not an area of expertise for me, so hard for me to think of things.
Yeah, understandable.
Is there something that you foresee your committee or the legislature working on specifically that you would want to see included?
Well, I will, if elected, I will reintroduce a climate change and mental health bill that's community-led. And also youth and adolescent mental health bill, which is really focused on school-age youth and how we can improve school-based mental health services. As well as screening.
Better on public record, could you speak to the microphone?
Yeah.
I'm picking up a little bit, but it's very neat. That way it'll be on.
I'm sorry. I was trying to stay back there with my kids because they get needy. So 2 bills that I'll be introducing, one of them for the second time, is around community-led mental health supports with regard to climate change and climate anxiety. The second is a adolescent and youth mental health supports, which would be largely school-based. So improving mental health literacy for staff and teachers, having some peer-to-peer programs for youth in schools, and improving screening. In short, that would be the school-based bill. So it's really getting at structural prevention and supports before we have to respond in crisis. I think our crisis system across the state is really becoming more robust with recent investments we've made, but I think I appreciate so deeply what you've done to build up our support for our local law enforcement officers, as well as, you know, continuing to strengthen the judicial system, which I'm on a board with mental health in the courts that's continuing to try to support the diversion programs, and we're going to continue that. But I think what I hear from a lot of residents is about concerns about the youth up there in the school, and I want to make sure that we think of them when we're developing policies. So
For both of these, would these have funding from the state, or would they be unfunded mandates?
they're not mandates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would they have funding from the state?
Well, it's all part of the bill development process. That's not done yet, so.
As a question, so something we do talk about in terms of public safety that has elements of mental health and supports are regionalization, and I know that we do mention it, regionalization again in here under 3D, but it doesn't currently mention anything about mental health services or additional supports. It's primarily focused on dispatch, regionalization of dispatch.
Yeah, it would include, that program includes 988.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering, from your experience and knowledge, if regionalization would be beneficial or would be a deterrent to the success of programs that you've seen elsewhere?
Depends on the program. Which program are you asking about? The regional dispatch?
Well, regional dispatch being the example that we have here, would that be, and something that we have discussed at length previously, if that would be beneficial or a deterrent to some of the programs that you're thinking of, services that you're thinking of, I should say?
I think it very much depends on the program.
Fair.
Yeah. But for
Fair
dispatch, no, I think that's wonderful, and I definitely supported that.
Okay.
And we're getting it for 988, which
Okay.
is great. 988 is the suicide hotline.
Yes. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Would you please follow up, send me the summary from each of those bills, and then I can see if there's a way to incorporate?
I'll send you a couple sentences, but just know that I'm not elected yet, so I haven't, I'm not going to send you the bills.
Well, I was thinking last time's version. But
Yeah.
Yes, a few
yeah, you
sentences
can look at
would
the
be
last
helpful.
one. It's still up there. But those are just a couple of the things just to prompt a conversation is what I'm trying to do with you. And, just thinking upstream, really far upstream, because the reality of behavioral health right now in Winooski is we're not suddenly going to fill the pipeline of the workforce that we need to respond to people's needs. We've been trying that for decades in Vermont. We're not suddenly going to have enough counselors and therapists and psychiatrists to diagnose people that need to get on a Medicaid. But we have each other, and we all bump into each other at Scout and, walking down Main Street, and that matters. And we're still a small enough community that helped us a lot through COVID, right? And everybody knows that. So when it comes to whether it's recovering after the next disaster, when all of our families in Barrie or Waterbury are, struggling to recover and we're tired because we've been down there mucking up basements with them, we can hold each other together through that. And that's the kind of upstream I'm talking about that doesn't cost a lot. We all know how to do it. So we should start thinking that kind of upstream when we're having policy conversations, and how can we put in place the mechanisms and the structures that really support that kind of innovative but local thinking.
Yeah. And definitely making sure that we include language access and thinking about racial equity in both of those. Because we
Exactly.
can't really have those conversations if we aren't addressing both of those.
I'm glad you said something about language. I have one recommended edit in this document. Somewhere under the public inebriate program, there's something about uncooperative people.
Yeah, let me find
Can we
that.
wordsmith that to make it a little more person-centered?
What's your suggestion?
Now I have to find it.
It's 4B. Oh, 3B, sorry, 3B.
Do you see it though?
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't know if it strikes anyone else the same way it strikes me, but it seems unnecessary to me to point out that they're uncooperative, because immediately after it says that they're inebriated. 3B. My recommendation would be per 18, Title 18, blah, 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 this, until the state can determine another option for safe housing of people deemed to be incapacitated.
But I don't think it's just about being incapacitated. I think this is also people who are incapacitated and creating safety concerns for everyone around them.
Okay, then I think uncooperative implies a story that isn't being told, right? It's there might be another way to say it that isn't
How
as
about remote striking, uncooperative, saying people deemed to be incapacitated and a safety risk to themselves and others?
at risk of harm to self or others.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the last thing I want to say is the detail is really wonderful in this. I really appreciate it. It's helpful for me.
Good, good.
Thanks, guys.
Mayor,
Thank you for
well, you
joining tonight.
Yeah, you put a lot of work into this, so thanks for making all the necessary revisions from last year and the concise, doing the best to make it as concise as possible while still meeting our goals and intentions.
Thank you. Well, I have a handful of changes to make.
But not too
And that's
many.
before the school board looks
Not
at
too
it.
many, yeah, and then we'll see what we learn from that. We'll bring this back at our December meeting for approval, hopefully. All right, thank you. Does anyone need a break, or shall we persist?
I'm okay.
Keep going.
Okay, item D, the treasurer's report and quarterly budget projections. You're up, John.
Good evening, council.
No.
All right, can you hear me? Okay. All right, so I'm here to present some key takeaways from the first quarter FY25 financial report. So hopefully I'm not too loud here. Whatever sounds good. So based on Q1 financial activity, the city's general fund is forecasting an annual surplus of about 0.3 million with a net fund balance of 2.9 million, which is about a 12% increase year over year. For reference, the previous fiscal year's ending net fund balance was 2.6, so 2.6 to 2.9. General fund revenue are forecasted at 11 million, about 60K above budget, so just like a hairline increase. The city's main driver of revenue collection, property tax, is estimated to account for about 8.2 of that revenue for the city this fiscal year, which is an increase year over year of about 7%. Like FY24, we predict that external factors in the market will be a major contributor to our growth in net assets. For example, rising interest rates accounted for about $250,000 in revenue earned in interest last year. General fund expenses are forecasted at 10.7 million, about 0.3 below budget. Again, this is forecast versus budget. Like FY24, there are cost savings due to staff vacancies across multiple departments. Staff vacancies reduce expenses like forecasted salary, fringe expenses, and other employee-related expenses as well. However, forecasted cost savings from staff vacancies may decrease throughout the year as positions fill up. Our police, for example, our police department currently has open positions, or at least last I heard, due to turnover this past year. However, savings from police department vacancies are offset by more costly overtime hours, so it kind of is like a balancing act. I do hear that a new officer, or last I heard, a new officer may be scheduled to begin in the coming weeks, so that's a good sign. The city's actively also working on filling the other police positions. And also, last I checked in, the search for the new city fire captain is still ongoing. Although the city of Winooski is forecasting losses in the water and wastewater funds, I believe mainly due to the Main Street revitalization project, gains in the general and parking fund offset losses and may result in a small gain, pretty small gain this fiscal year. And again, just to be clear, those gains and those funds are not going to be like offsetting those losses in the other funds. There's no like cash movement. It's just if you added them all up, like what would the net be? As the year progresses, we expect to see those surpluses continue to lower, closer to break-even levels as unanticipated expenses occur. We're really early in the year. It's only Q1. The Main Street revitalization project is still tracking on time and is expected to be completed by mid-2026. We should continue to monitor the process of the Abenaki Garage project, which is now, I believe, anticipated to be completed by this spring. We should also continue to prepare for upcoming long-term construction projects, like the construction of the new Winooski Bridge, which I feel like is like the elephant in the room. The timeline for the Winooski Bridge project was presented to the City Council, I believe, a few weeks ago on the 21st. The city is now estimating that construction for the bridge will be initiated in 2027, I believe, and completed by 2030. As a reminder, specific details to support current forecasts can be found within the respective financial report on the City of Winooski website. If you're interested in taking a closer look, please bear in mind that this is a Q1 report, or quarter one report, and that projections are really a best guess at this point, guided by the financial activities we've realized so far, and therefore are subject to change as we progress through the year. Mayor Lott, just want to add, I received your questions and respond to them via email so that you had record.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
It sounds like we may have some local options tax information from Q1, but you probably haven't seen those.
Probably not, we just got them today.
Yeah, I was just speaking to Angela. I believe we were just discussing it, but I haven't seen anything yet. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And then just thinking about the recent reappraisal appeals, and I believe we won't have final numbers on that until after next week. Just curious the extent to which those final decisions will impact our revenues.
Oh, I guess I'm not familiar with those. I guess we just have to see into what they are, and they would, whatever they're reporting would impact Q2. So we update the forecast each quarter based on what information we have.
Okay. Right. So given that, we probably won't know before we vote at the end of January.
End of January. So Q2 would be released probably early January. So you may.
Okay.
I'm happy to push those through too, and get the report done earlier if that's helpful.
We can see how it all shakes out with the schedules. It might. Angela would probably have a good sense of.
Yeah.
To what extent
I think she would too.
There will be a marginal impact or a more significant impact.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't think we need to. We can wait to see what she says.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, though.
Yeah.
Anyone else questions?
Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be in touch.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, on to item E, on for discussion or approval, amendments to the Housing Trust Fund Home Improvement Program.
So I did kind of preview the last meeting a little bit, but so the Housing Trust Fund currently offers 4 programs, one of which includes the Home Improvement Program, commonly referred to as HIP. While HIP was widely utilized in the past, it has seen no utilization since changes were made to the Housing Trust Fund in 2021. The proposed amendments are designed to enhance access, boost participation, and increase housing quality in the city. So the proposed amendments include, we discussed this last time, but shifting from single-family and multifamily home definitions, so 2 different categories, to private and public building categories, which will clarify referral processes, since those categorical names will have the same referral process, whereas multifamily and single family have overlap sometimes with private and public buildings. The removal of an owner occupancy requirement, which will allow for more properties to qualify. Again, it's an idyllic version to have the owner occupancy requirement, but it just made the program too restrictive for most people to utilize. Adjusted income requirements with new tiered assistance based off of owner income levels. Introduction of grant funding options tied to the property owner's income, making assistance more equitable. We had received quite a few applications that were under the impression that the program was grant funding rather than loan funding. People who, after which, were no longer interested in the program. So it was the Housing Commission's intention that once funding was stabilized a little bit into the Housing Trust Fund, that we would look at ways that we could make the program a little bit more generous and therefore more enticing for people. Modified tenant rent requirements, which remove the rule requiring tenants to pay no more than 30% of their income on rent, while maintaining the area median income eligibility criterion. VHFA's most recent data shows that over 50% of Vermonters who are renters pay over 30% of their income on rent. So while the 30% of your income plus the AMI is the gold standard and it's ideal, that's not the reality for a lot of people. And it just increasingly adds more barriers to property owners who would otherwise potentially be eligible. Funding source expansion to include funding from payments in lieu from prospective inclusionary zoning and replacement regulations if passed. The old language actually already had the inclusionary zoning language in it from 2021, because I know that had been discussed loosely, but just including replacement regulations if passed. With the drafts as they are currently, those could be 2 potentially larger sums of contribution to the Housing Trust Fund than even short-term rentals are. Obviously, that's not anything that we are going to count on until it happens, but just good to keep that in mind. And then shortened application processing times with options for email approval if the next Housing Commission meeting is not timely enough. All loans and grants will ultimately go through council, but how it's written right now is that it had to go to a Housing Commission meeting first. And with some of the programming, for example, the down payment assistance program and the interest rate buy down program, for people who are looking to buy a home, that can end up being a 2-month process or even longer. Sometimes the Housing Commission doesn't meet for a month. We don't, have quorum. There have been situations where that is a stressor for the applicant. And so I just changed the language, obviously with the permission of the Housing Commission, that allows for email approval. So as long as a quorum of Housing Commission members approve via email, then that can go to council next without having to wait for the meeting. And also just to warn, so with these changes, there's a possibility that the Housing Trust Fund will be drawn down faster than it could be replenished. The current available balance in the Housing Trust Fund is $354,000, not including short-term rental license fees. The short-term rental registry program has to date, will be contributing about $24,000. So like 378,000 is what we're essentially at once Angela has done that transfer. And we conservatively estimate that the total 2025 fiscal year contribution will be $50,000, likely more. If the rate of demand exceeds the amount of replenishing from the short-term rental registry or any future source, staff will work with the Housing Commission to develop adjustments for sustainability to recommend to council. But as I've said many times at this point, the money has not been used at all, at least since I started. So definitely hoping that these amendments will make the program more accessible, more generous, and more appealing to homeowners. Because the point of it is to improve housing quality, and if we've made it so difficult for people to be eligible and to apply for, then we're not helping housing quality at the end of the day.
I appreciate the effort here to make it more accessible and equitable. I would put it up there for council's consideration. I wouldn't start this high on the grants, given what you point out about potentially drawing down on the fund too quickly. We don't have the other revenue sources in place yet, and while we likely intend to, that's not guaranteed. I might start with the percent eligible amounts being lower. So instead of 30 to 80, like 15 to 65% or something, so that there's less likelihood of overrunning the fund. We could always increase them in the future.
Yeah, the Housing Commission did discuss doing 100% grant for very low income people, which is what is as 80%, but it would have been administratively been difficult because it would have functioned as a different program. Of like a full grant program is different than a loan program. So we ended up landing at 80% just because that is for people who have a very significantly low income. So for like private home ownership, that will probably end up being like seniors who don't have an income. We have had one application, well, she hasn't submitted yet, but I've been speaking with a community member who has a very low income. She's a senior, has a code-related issue that it's on her financially to fix. And I will also say that that is only if the project is more than $30,000. If the project is less than that, then it would just be 80% of whatever is needed. We're not just going to give $30,000 regardless of the project. I think the Housing Commission is feeling like we've had this money and it just sits there. So it would be better to be more aggressive and actually get money out there and help people, because at the end of the day, we don't get a ton of applications anyways. Hopefully we will start getting more. But obviously that's something that could always be changed. But I also understand wanting to proceed more cautiously.
I'm comfortable with how it is proposed, again, because it hasn't had that drawdown, and also considering that the Housing Commission, I think, has been discussing this for a while now, and then on and off this has come up because of that lack of use. So I think I'm comfortable with, if this is what they think is what's going to start making a difference, and I'm comfortable starting with this higher amount.
I have two things. Let me see if I can find the first one. Sorry, I did not write it down, so. I was wondering about the affordability definitions under section 1E2 for rental units. I think there are a number of folks that I know that are probably in the 100 to 120 range that still currently struggle with finding affordable rentals. I don't know if there was any discussion being factored into affordability definitions and in expanding that even slightly from 80% to 100%.
Yeah, so based off of the rental or landlord survey data that I analyzed last year, most rents, the median rent was around 80% for every single category of bedroom type, so 1, 2, studio, 3. And so the Housing and Planning Commissions are sort of working towards using 80% for our rental affordability level. It has previously been 100, sometimes it's 120, it's kind of all over the place, but for Winooski specifically, considering we are lower income and our housing is close to 80% AMI, going higher than that is basically going above the median, so we didn't feel like that was an appropriate level to use for affordable because it's higher than our median. But I know 100 has been used a lot previously, and it is maybe more accurate in like a higher income community, I think. But that's the reason. So we do like 80 for rentals and then 120 is for home ownership generally.
Thanks. It's helpful to know the additional data review.
Yeah. And I have all of those. I'll start processing those for next year. So we'll see if it changed at all, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
Section 5A. I'm just curious if it makes sense to refer to like a separate framing or like a separate document, given that these income levels have some recurring frequency that they change.
Yeah, we did discuss that.
Like referring to a VHFA.
Yeah, I do have it on my calendar quarterly to check if they've updated that so I can change this. I think it was an accessibility thing that I had discussed with Elaine, that Elaine felt like the link to the numbers was more helpful and having it in the document was more helpful for people. So I also received feedback actually from our INB commissioner who had looked at the HIP program potentially to utilize themselves. And one of the things that was mentioned is like linking to other things sometimes is not super straightforward, and having it a little bit more explicit on the document itself was something that they felt like would be useful for kind of the average layperson, which actually they are not. They work in construction. So they were like, if I feel like this is complicated, then I can't imagine someone else. So I used that feedback to put that there, but I do have it quarterly to check it because I know like we don't want it to be outdated because the HFA will release it one day and then everything will be. But yeah, I just checked it the other day actually to make sure.
Okay. And then given the desire to increase demand, is there language in here, and there may be, it just hasn't jumped out to me as being super clear, is there language that indicates more or less while funds are available? So like if the fund balance hits 0, we can't draw a negative balance. So essentially, like, if we are successful in increasing the demand for it, and we do draw down more rapidly than we are able to replenish it, do we have language that says that it's really only as long as the fund has available balance?
I think probably not explicitly, but it certainly wouldn't hurt to add that.
Yeah, I would just want to make sure that that's clear, so that we're not promising anything that we don't have available, and that we would need to then have to navigate drawing from unallocated reserves or something of that nature. I don't think that's the intent of this program.
No, I think even
so I just want that to be clear.
Yeah, I think even if we were drawing more than we were earning, that would be something that would be discussed. So I can't imagine us getting to that point, but you never know.
And again, for transparency, I think it would be beneficial to say it as long as there's available fund balance.
I agree, so no one comes back saying, I met the qualifications, where's my money?
Like, there could be a lawsuit, why aren't you providing me the funds that I've requested after meeting all of these standards, so.
And also in section 5, the eligibility considerations 2F, is that number from HUD or is that a number that we've created? I just wonder about the liquid asset portion Are we considering like 401k savings within that?
That is up to opportunities. So
Okay.
that'll be what, it's up to their requirements for issuing their mortgages.
Okay. Do we know what that
I can ask.
Because you can not have a lot of cash in your bank account, but have been able to get $31,000 in a 401k if you work for a good employer.
Yeah.
You still don't have a lot of money.
Yeah. I can ask opportunities, and then we could be more explicit about that. I will also say we explored the idea of a low interest loan option for lower income folks as like an alternative to we thought about grant and then, portion grant and then also low interest loan possibility, because right now all of our loans are offered at market rate. But since the program is not super heavily utilized at this point, OCU said it's like too much administrative work to execute. So I did ask.
Thank you.
Bryn Thomas, how do you feel about the grant amounts in here?
I think I definitely understand trying to loosen everything up so that we can get people actually applying for the program. I guess I have a slight concern that you have done such a good job in this document that all of a sudden you will see a lot of interest and to what you had put. Then if we have a higher amount, it might deplete it faster. But that said, I weigh the fact that you haven't had any applicants, so.
I feel like it will take a while for the word to get out.
Yeah, and I will, like home, what are they called? They're called, like home repair loans are very common. Like every single bank essentially offers a loan program for home repairs. Ours is also at market, which is why we really needed to differentiate ourselves. Otherwise, no one is going to participate in our program because we have affordability requirements and, requirements to not short-term rent. And there's other things that, like other just traditional bank offerings won't require, which is why I think the grant portion is so important. And then the other aspect of that is obviously we can, Opportunities is able to lend to folks who have a lower credit score. Just since we keep our fund balance there, we can offset that, which is an important part too. I would love it if we had a lot of applicants. I don't think that would happen quickly enough that we wouldn't be able to communicate that.
I was just going to ask if you saw that the fund was all of a sudden depleting rapidly, this could be brought back to us, I would imagine, so that we could adjust.
Yeah, I think it says in the cover sheet that if it's more than what is coming in, which at this point is around 50K, so I would say more than two probably, like full grant amounts would trigger that conversation, which would be amazing I think even having one would be great at this point, but.
Well, I also want to call out something you just said about like differentiating us in the market. We're not trying to provide a bunch of loans and grants to people. Like that's not the goal, right? It is to fill a specific need in the community.
Yeah, and that's why I think because we're doing that, I keep going with this higher grant amount makes sense to me because of all those pieces. Because we might be the only option.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if they qualify for this, that genuinely means that they aren't at like minimum housing code quality, or they're undertaking an important energy efficiency project or an ADA accessibility project, which are all extraordinarily important. So that's part of why we also removed like the top income cap for property owners, as long as they're renting to lower income people, is because if they're a higher income and they want to borrow from the city and be subject to our affordability requirements rather than borrowing from a traditional bank, we technically there's interest earned on those loans that are issued. They wouldn't be receiving any sort of grant. It's extraordinarily unlikely that situation will happen, but we felt that, why have that requirement when it was potentially unnecessary. But
When do we know, when will the housing needs assessment be available?
That's a good question.
Then a different question.
I guess
should that be used to inform decisions on this?
that will be,
Next year.
next year.
Yes,
We
yeah.
are executing currently the first phase of that project, which is essentially a literature review and a review of existing data, a compilation of that. A report will be produced and presented to council and staff, and then also there will be another literature review on housing policies as well. I guess I can't say who it is because they haven't signed the contract. So the phase one is starting, but the entire community engagement and primary data collection won't be happening until later in next year. So ultimately, yes, ideally it will inform most of the housing related policy work and decisions that are made. But at this point, it's a little early.
In terms of the structure of the grants, are those, and just for clarification, reimbursements, or are those upfront payments for like approved projects?
Yes, so I need to talk to Angela again.
So
about
what
this.
I'm getting
We did
at-
discuss this, yeah.
What I'm getting at is there a risk
Uh-huh.
of
Yeah,
providing funding up front and then the intended project not being
Yeah.
completed?
I think what Angela and I had discussed is that there will be a quote that is required, and it needs to be from a specific licensed contractor for whatever code related, if it's code related, upgrade or changes are being done. The quote needs to match that. Needs to be from a licensed, whatever. And then the money will be allocated based off of that. If the quote says, like $10,000, and we're not going to give someone 30, we're going to give you whatever the entire quote says. Angela, do you want to?
Yep, we can also, because this would normally be a loan, we can file something in the land records that puts a lien on the property until they provide us the documentation necessary to prove the grant. And then we can release that. That's typically what was done historically for things like the Burlington Lead program. You do the remediation, you meet all of the requirements, and then they release the lien on your property.
Okay. Yeah, I think a policy and procedure I've made some flow charts and things, but after this, I will be making a policy and procedure. Because this program specifically it was written very well, but it's quite vague in terms of the operational side of things.
Yeah.
So it's taken a lot of time to figure out how things are verified, because there's a lot of things that weren't even like an eligible activity that could be verified.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taken a little bit to figure that out, but a policy and priority definitely will be created prior to us issuing.
So to answer your question, if there are best practices for risk reduction in place, then I'm more comfortable with a higher grant amount, but not unless there are
Okay.
best practices for risk reduction put in place.
And I would suggest that a quote is not sufficient, because I can get a quote for free and never execute the project. I think some sort of proof of expense
there'd be
is
inspections
necessary.
before and after, but yeah.
Yeah, so if they get a quote and we give them the money and they don't complete the project, then we would follow what Angela just described. Okay.
Well, I'm going to move that we accept these amendments to the Housing Trust Fund Home Improvement Program with the added language that if there is no money in the fund, that we cannot follow through with the request.
There's a motion on the table by Aurora. Does anyone want to second it?
I'll second.
Motion by Aurora, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you. That is the end of this evening's agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Aurora, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Aurora, I love it. The unprompted motion.
I know.